Alrighty, so the MLS All-Star break is now over, and that pretty much means that we are now officially in the home stretch of the MLS regular season. And for most teams, they have only 10 games left in the season, and that this is really kind of the make or break time we're going to start seeing, especially with the way that I've mentioned many times before. Both conferences in terms of the playoff race are just red hot right now. I mean, there are just so many teams that is within it, and it's tightly congested that, last year I thought heading into decision day, that decision day in terms of the playoff race was crazy, especially in the West. We might get even crazier in terms of this decision day if this keeps up, and especially the fact that it's not just going to be the Western Conference, but also in the Eastern Conference of how tight the playoff race is, and that don't be surprised, in this preview I mentioned so many times there's going to be some playoff six-pointer, and just like what I said about last time, don't take a drink every time I mention MLS After Dark. Don't take a drink every time I mention it's a playoff six-pointer match. But first of all, we're going to talk about the first game, which is the New York Red Bulls versus Orlando City. And by the way, there's going to be 14 games that's going to be happening, but 12 of them is going to be happening on Saturday, which is what I'm going to be previewing. And then on Sunday, there's going to be the 2 games, and I'll preview that tomorrow, because the first game doesn't actually start until 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff is 6:08 p.m. local time. And because all these games is happening at nighttime, yeah, that means it's going to be a very congested schedule, and there's going to be a lot of overlaps that I'm going to have to deal with. But the first game, of course, as I mentioned, is between the Red Bulls and Orlando City. The Red Bulls have a 10-7-7 record, while Orlando is in an absolute free fall right now, 8-6-10. And in terms of the all-time meeting, the Red Bulls leads at 9-2-6 over Orlando. And the last 5 head-to-head matchup, it was the Red Bulls winning 3-0 against Orlando. Then the Red Bulls won 2-1 on the road against Orlando, and then the Red Bulls won 2-1 against Orlando. It was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams, and then Orlando, of course, won 3-1 against the New York Red Bulls. So, yeah, it's safe to say that the Red Bulls have had the better record in terms of the last 5 head-to-head matchup. And when you also look at the matchup in terms of forms itself, yeah, you can say that the Red Bulls are going to be the favorites coming into this game, but we shall see whether that is the case, and especially for Orlando, again, they desperately need a win. Like, it's gone so bad in terms of this free fall that they're now outside of the playoffs for the first time this season, and that I mentioned many times before. If they don't make it to the playoffs, then yes, a certain guy called Oscar Pereira could potentially be on the hot seat and maybe ends up in the chopping block, because there's no way, with all the talent that this team has had, especially with them adding in the offseason, that this team should miss the playoffs this season. But now moving on in terms of the next match, and speaking of all the talent, you can say the same thing about Atlanta United, and that this is going to be the first time, and many times I'm going to mention that this isn't a playoff six-pointer, because it's between one team that is above the red line, that is FC Cincinnati, who their record is exactly at 8 apiece, 8 wins, 8 draws, and 8 losses. Doesn't usually don't see that kind of number deep into the season. While Atlanta have a 7-7-9 record, and I believe they are 11th right now in the Eastern Conference. But like I said, the East, just like the West, is very tight. 5th all the way through 12 is only separated by 5 points. And that this game will start at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff is 7:38 p.m. local time. In fact, this is the first of 4 games that's going to be happening at that same time. So I won't mention the next 3 games when exactly the kickoff is, because it's going to be the same as this one. All-time record, Atlanta still does have the all-time record with a 5-3-1 record over FC Cincinnati, but at least in these last 2 games, it seems like Cincinnati has done better. They got a 0-0 draw last time against Atlanta. Then they, of course, well, actually, they lost 2-1 against Atlanta United. So, actually, I take back what I said, that they had a relatively good record, because when you look at the last 5 head-to-head, Atlanta has dominated that. They of course, won 4-0 against FC Cincinnati, got a 1-1 draw against them, and then it was a 2-0 win against FC Cincinnati. And again, for Atlanta, after a big victory in the game against the Seattle Sounders. In fact, I think both of these teams are coming off of a big victory too, because FC Cincinnati arguably just had their best performance in their franchise history, shutting out the team that is currently at the top of the Eastern Conference, that is the Philadelphia Union, and just kind of blow them out the water. And we'll see whether they can do it again against an Atlanta team that is just trying to find some sort of consistency so they can make a run for the playoffs. But now moving on, in terms of the next match, is New England versus DC United. So talk about another team that is in the mix of the playoffs. The Revs, of course, course, are one of those teams, and just like Atlanta and Cincinnati, they got a huge victory before the All-Star break, getting a 3-0 victory against Orlando City, and are looking to follow that up against the worst team in the Eastern Conference, that is DC United, with a 6-4-13 record, while New England has a 7-9-7 record. All-time meeting, DC does lead the all-time meeting, 39-16-35 over the Revs. In terms of the last 5 head-to-head matchup, DC did win 3-2 against the New England Revolution last time both of these teams face off against each other, but the Revs did return the favor by winning 3-2 on the road. Then the Revs also won 3-2 against DC United. It's kind of interesting how the last meeting has ended by a scoreline of 3-2. I mean, it's a common scoreline when there's a lot of action, but it's kind of interesting the last meeting that has been the case. But before that, it was a 1-0 win that New England has against DC, and then New England, of course, won 4-3 against DC United. So there's going to be goals in this game. I mean, at least what we've seen in the last 5 head-to-head matchup, there tends to be a lot of goals, and maybe this could be one of it, or it could be a very forgettable game, just like the one that DC played in the last game against the New York Red Bulls. Hopefully that's not the case, because, yeah, I don't want to remember that game between Team DC and the Red Bulls, and probably the worst Atlantic Cup I've ever seen, and undoubtedly probably the worst game I think in this season it is. But we'll see whether this is going to be interesting, and especially for New England trying to get themselves above the red line. If they can, of course, get a win in this and hope that result goes in favor of them, they, of course, will go above the red line. And that it goes the same case. Well, actually, it doesn't go the same case because I forgot that Chicago is currently above the red line right now. But they do have a tough task in this one, as they're going to be playing against the Philadelphia Union. In fact, this is probably, if you talk about the most underrated game this week, this is probably one of them, because, you know, we know the Union are the top team in the Eastern Conference with a 12-9-3 record, and Chicago 8-6-10, but they are one of the hottest team, if not the hottest team right now in the Eastern Conference. All-time meeting, it was a 14-7-10 record that the Union has over the Fire, and the last 5 head-to-head matchup, the Fire actually did win against the Union earlier this season. 1-0 was the result. Before, it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams, a 3-3 draw between both of these teams. Then the Union did had a 2-0 road win against Chicago, and then a 2-1 home win against the Chicago Fire. And like I said, you know, what's interesting with this being underrated is that, you know, the Union, we know that they're very good at home, but they're about to face against a team that is red hot like the Chicago Fire, and we'll see who, of course, will come out on the edge, especially with the way that I'm pretty sure the Union wants to bounce back after a very, very poor performance, and probably the worst performance that they had in that game against FC Cincinnati, where they were just being outplayed by Cincinnati throughout the full 90 minutes. But now moving on, in terms of the next match, is Toronto versus the Portland Timbers. So, you know, this is also kind of a matchup that I think it could be a playoff 6-pointer, though for different conference reason, because this is an inter-conference matchup, and you know that if you are those teams that is either in the Western Conference, like all those teams that is in the jumbo mess that we've seen in the playoff race in the Western Conference, you know they're going to be rooting for Toronto FC. Whereas all those teams in the Eastern Conference that is in the jumbo mess, you're going to be rooting for the Portland Timbers every time when you have an interconference matchup like this. And likewise for TFC, they have a 7-5-12 record, while Portland is kind of becoming the Nashville SC of MLS. They have a 7-12-6 record, and they have drawn so many games that I think no other team in the league has actually got double-digit draw than the Portland Timbers. And it's kind of interesting because you know, I know they gone on this really long unbeaten run that, you know, I mentioned it is still the longest active unbeaten run in the league, but how many of those games they of course got a draw in those? Probably a lot, knowing how much draws that they of course have suffered in these last couple of games, including the last one when they got a 1-1 draw against FC Dallas. But in terms of the all-time meeting, it's pretty much dead even. 4 wins apiece for both of these teams, 2 draw. And the last 5 head-to-head meeting, it was the Timbers winning 2-1 on the road against Toronto. Then the Timbers have a 2-0 lead against TFC. TFC then won 4-1 against the Timbers. 2-1 win that the Timbers had against Toronto. And then Toronto has a 1-0 win against the Portland Timbers. And again, you know, this is a matchup that, even though it's an inter-conference matchup, it's a playoff 6-pointer, considering both of these teams are trying to get themselves above the red line. And that I'm also going to be interested to see whether this matchup could be a high-scoring affair, because both of these teams have a very good attack, especially in the hands of TFC, knowing that it seems like they're going with a classic Bob Bradley kind of tactics. all gas, no brakes, or in this case, all offense and no defense, and they're just gonna win like 4-3 and 3-2 every single game because of all the star power that they have on the attack, and also the defense is pretty iffy at best. But now moving on, in terms of the next match, is Inter Miami versus NYCFC. So this game will start at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff is 8:08 p.m. local time, as it is usually the case with Inter Miami playing at home as the kickoff. Miami has an 8-6-10 record, while NYCFC have a 12-6-5 record. All-time meeting, well, it hasn't been close. I mean, you can probably tell by the all-time meeting that it's been not just one-sided, but it's literally one-sided in definition. All 5 wins has been in favor of NYCFC, and that include earlier this season winning 2-0 against Inter Miami in a game that is always known as Tati Cassiono's farewell game. But before that, they won 3-1 on the road against Miami, won 2-0 against Inter Miami, won 3-2 on the road against Inter Miami, and then won 1-0 on the road against Inter Miami in the first ever meeting between both of these teams. But I will say that if there is a chance where Miami has the first shot of getting a point against NYCFC, now's the time to do so, because NYCFC, ever since the departure of Tati Cassionos, have not looked good whatsoever. And Inter Miami themselves, while they are still kind of a little bit inconsistent, they're starting to break out of that in a way where they're starting to go on a little mini unbeaten streak to get themselves above the red line. And like I said, I know this has been their biggest nemesis, and NYCFC always have Inter Miami number, but knowing that Inter Miami has really played well in these last couple of months, and really they have played well ever since they got off to such a terrible start and being one of the last team to finally getting their first win of the season. They have had a really good record, almost a playoff kind of level of record, and that has got them in this race of potentially making the playoffs this season. But that being said, I am now going to switch board and look at the last 6 games that's going to be happening in terms of the busy Saturday night action. So moving on, in the next match, we got Austin FC versus Sporting KC, and this will be the first of 4 games that's going to be kicking off at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, and that's kind of interesting because I think this is the first time we have that many games kicking off around that time, because that's usually not the time where there's a lot of games that is happening. It's usually like 7:30 and 4:30 p.m. Pacific time. That's kind of like the meat of the action, but this week, a lot of late games, and we start off with this one, as I mentioned, Austin versus Sporting KC. Austin have a 13-6-5 record, while Sporting KC have a 6-5-14 record, the worst record in MLS right now. All-time meeting, Austin leads the all-time meeting, though it's only the 5th meeting between both of these teams, and Austin have a 2-1-1 advantage over Sporting KC. And in terms of the last 4 head-to-head matchup, Austin did get the win against Sporting KC earlier this season on the road, a 2-0 win. Then they won 3-1 against Sporting KC before it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams, and Sporting KC winning the first ever meeting between both of these teams. Now, on paper, it looks like this should be an easy victory for Austin FC, especially for SKC. They're pretty much just seeing out the season, and they're looking more forward to what they're going to do in the offseason than thinking about making the playoffs this year. But, there's one thing that I will say is that maybe this might not be as straightforward as some people would say, especially Austin this season has struggled at home, and especially against teams that you would expect that they should easily win at home, and they don't. And I won't be surprised if Sporting KC can pull off an upset. And we know that Sporting KC this season, as bad as they are, they have been able to get wins against really good teams. That kind of reminds me a little bit of FC Dallas last year. Remember how FC Dallas was a very bad team and they finished 11 in the Western Conference? But for whatever reason, when they face against the good team, they're able to get a win. And that includes a win against the Supporter Shield standing that is the New England Revolution. And that, I feel like they're kind of like the FC Dallas of this year, where they lose a lot of games, but when they get to play against tough opponents, whether at home and away, they're able to get a win at the end. So, for Austin, they shouldn't just treat this like it's an easy 3 points. They need to, of course, show up in this game. And, I know they're in a very good position right now in terms of not only making the playoffs, but probably going to finish in second place, because I think we probably know now who's going to finish first and second, with LAFC probably going to win the Supporter Shield this season, and Austin just miles ahead of third place FC Dallas right now. But they can't just take their foot off the gas just yet. They need to, of course, keep playing stronger, because even though it's a pretty big gap between second and third, it can close in an instant in this league. But now moving on in the next match, we got the Colorado Rapids versus Columbus Crew. The Rapids 8-6-9, while the Crew has an 8-9-6 record. All-time meeting, the Rapids have a 23-10-13 record over Columbus. So Colorado has pretty much had a good record against the Crew in all these meeting between two teams that were two of the original franchise coming into the league in 1996. But last 5 head-to-head meeting, it was a 3-2 win that the Rapids had against Columbus before Columbus winning 2-1 against Colorado. Colorado then got a 2-1 win against Columbus before it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams. And then the Crew, of course, getting a 2-1 win against the Colorado Rapids. And I won't be surprised this could be a high-scoring game too, because it seems like both of these teams have some good attacking option, especially for the Crew. It seems like they tends to show all their attacking kind of talent whenever they go on the road. Whereas for the Rapids, we know that they have been just a free scoring team in these last 2 games, scoring 4 in the last game and then scoring 5 against the Red Bulls. And I don't know if that's gonna continue into this one, but I won't be surprised if this could be like a chaotic game. And also it's a game that, like I said about the game between Toronto and the Portland Timbers, it's kind of a playoff 6-pointer between both of these teams that for the Crew, they are above the red line, but not by much. They're in the big mash of teams that is kind of logjam in the Eastern Conference playoff race. And for the Rapids, they have got themselves back in the playoff race after it looked like all hopes were lost, but they need to, of course, keep winning, especially at home, knowing the fact that this is a team that does not do well on the road. But now moving on in the next match, we got FC Dallas versus the San Jose Earthquakes. So this is a matchup between FC Dallas, who's currently jumped all the way up to 3rd place in the Western Conference and started getting back themselves to a position that they were early in the season with a 9-9-7 record, while the Quakes, we know that they're pretty much done this season alongside with Sporting KC with a 5-9-10 record. All-time meeting though, this is where it gets interesting, because despite the fact that, for this looked like it's game that FC Dallas should get a win against a lowly San Jose Earthquakes team, that's just not been the case in terms of the last 5 head-to-head meeting. In fact, I think if you ask me who is probably the biggest nemesis and the bogey team for FC Dallas all this year, I mean, there's a lot of them, but one of those obvious teams that I can instantly say that are just a bogey team for FC Dallas is the San Jose Earthquakes. I mean, for whatever reason, the Quakes always have Dallas number, and they pretty much had their number ever since 2017, with them not losing a single game to FC Dallas ever since the last time they lost to them was in 2016, and therefore they built up a very good all-time record, 29, 19, and 20 over FC Dallas. Though the last couple of meetings, it has been a lot of draws. It was a 1-1 draw between them and Dallas on decision day. Then another 1-1 draw between them and FC Dallas on the road. They did win 3-1 against FC Dallas before a 2-2 draw between both of these teams, and then a 0-0 draw between both of these teams too. So again, this is a game that for FC Dallas, as good as they have been in these last couple of games, yeah, playing against a bogey team is always tough. I mean, just ask their intercity rival Austin FC of how, I forgot to mention also when they play against the Quakes, that's also another bogey team that they tend to face. I mean, I feel like for both of these teams, they need to ask the Houston Dynamo how to beat the Quakes, because at least the Dynamo does have a good record against the Quakes, and those two other Texas teams, I just wonder how in the world are we not able to beat this team, no matter if they're good or if they're bad. And that, I think in this game, I wouldn't be a big surprise if the Quakes can not only get a draw out of this game, but pull off an upset at this game. Because if there's something to tell me how even the worst Quakes team ever back in 2018 was able to get a double against FC Dallas, you know that the Quakes definitely have FC Dallas number, and that this is definitely a matchup that Dallas fans does not want to see if their playoff line is decided. And while their playoff line isn't really decided, they're in a jumbo mess in the Western Conference, and that they really want to get a win in this one and just kind of finally end their kryptonite in terms of, for whatever reason, they just simply cannot beat the San Jose Earthquakes. But now moving on into the next match, and speaking of Houston, they play against Montreal in this game. The Dynamo has a 7-4-13 record, while Montreal has a 12-4-8 record. In the all-time meeting, the Dynamo does have a slight lead, 8-1-7 over Montreal. And the last 5 head-to-head matchup, it was a 2-0 win that Montreal has against Houston. Before the Dynamo did win 2-1 against Montreal, then Montreal winning 1-0 against Houston. Then Houston getting a 3-1 win against Montreal before Montreal getting a 1-0 win against the Houston Dynamo. So at least when you look at the pattern in the last 5 head-to-head matchup, the home team has been the one that getting the win. And this could be a case, again, where maybe the home team will get the win. I mean, I know the Dynamo has had a really bad run, but this is an opportunity against a Montreal team that, as good as this season has been for Montreal, they've had trouble in terms of playing against teams that are not very good, and that they're kind of probably the team that is most notorious in terms of playing down to their competition. And this is definitely one of those games where they're on the road, and while this season they have definitely been a much better road team compared to past, against a Dynamo team, against a team that sometimes, even though they're not in a very good run, they still somehow lose to them. I mean, just as what happened a couple of weeks ago when they were playing against a Galaxy team that was also on a free fall, and they lost to them 4-0 in that game. Which, again, it's hard to explain. How in the world do they get absolutely blown apart by the Galaxy when they were not in a good run, and Montreal was still in a decent run, albeit even though they were desperately missing Georgi Mihailovic in that game too. Speaking of the Galaxy, that's who we're going to be talking about next as they play against the Vancouver Whitecaps. So this game will start at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff is 7:08 p.m. local time. The Galaxy have a 9-3-11 record, while the Whitecaps have an 8-6-10 record, and it's getting to a point where, with the way that the Galaxy are losing so many games, the Whitecaps are actually getting close in terms of passing them. In fact, I think if the Whitecaps does get a win in this, they would pass the Galaxy in terms of where they are in the standings, because again, the Galaxy has just been an absolute car crash for the past couple of months. But in terms of the all-time meeting, they still do lead the all-time meeting over the Whitecaps, 14-6-9 over Vancouver. And the last 5 head-to-head matchup, it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams before Vancouver did win 2-1 against the Galaxy. Though the Galaxy returned the favor by winning 2-1 on the road. Then Vancouver won 3-0 against the Galaxy before the Galaxy won 1-0 against the Vancouver Whitecaps. And again, this is a matchup that, knowing Vancouver isn't in the mix of making the playoffs, they want to get free points against the Galaxy, but so is the Galaxy too. And also, this is the time for me to once again mention that this is a playoff 6-pointer, with the way that both of these teams, even though they're below the red line, they want to get a win so that they can get themselves either closer or even above the red line once again. And especially, I think, for the case of the Galaxy, with how much of a free fall that they're going through, they need a win desperately. They need something similar to what they did against Atlanta, where, I mentioned in that game against Atlanta, they desperately need a win because things were fall apart, and they did. But it's now all about not only getting a win, but also getting consecutive win to get this team back on track, because, it has not been a great year for the Galaxy whatsoever, and that they do lose this game. Oh boy, there's going to be a lot of Greg Vanney. I mean, there's already a lot of Vanney out chant from the Galaxy fan base. There's going to be a lot more if they do lose to the Whitecaps. And there could be a case that it could happen, because the Galaxy, they're one of the worst teams this season at home. They have lost so many home games this year, whether it's against good team or against bad team too. But now moving on in terms of the next match, and talk about another LA team, but this team is definitely no doubt the better team, and in fact they are the best team in the league right now, as they're going to be playing against the expansion team Charlotte FC. 9-2-13 is Charlotte's record, while LAFC have the league best 16-3-4. As this game will start at 10:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 p.m. Pacific, and I actually didn't put the actual kickoff, but it's actually going to be 7:38 p.m. local time. And anytime when Charlotte play against a Western Conference team, that this is the first ever meeting, and indeed it is the case. And I wasn't kidding when I talked about how Charlotte, even though they're in the mix in the playoff race, they're going to face probably the toughest schedule out of any team right now. And it start with this gauntlet to finish off the season by playing against the best team in the league. And that, right now LAFC are just, they're literally showing everybody that they are not only truly back, but they're now going to be a force to be reckoned with, like what we saw back in 2019. And that I expect, unless if we're going to see one of those crazy kind of event where sometimes even the worst team in the league can beat the best team in the league. Well, I mean, in Charlotte cases, they're not the worst team in the league, but they are definitely heavy underdog coming into this game, especially against LAFC that has been so good this season at their home stadium. I mean, I think they only lost once so far this time, and it was against Austin FC. But I mean, this is a team that they know how to win at home, and in general, they know how to win in many different ways. And you would definitely expect that they should get another 3 points. But again, MLS is a crazy league, and if we're gonna have another crazy weekend like what we saw last week, then there could be a case that Charlotte could get the victory, and I think every Charlotte fans will hope that maybe this is gonna be one of those weekends like last week where it's gonna be crazy, and they would be probably one of the last team on everybody's mind that can take down LAFC on the road. But there you have it. That is pretty much it in terms of looking at the preview for those 12 games that's going to be happening on Saturday. And like I said, I will do the preview for the Sunday game tomorrow, because the first game doesn't actually start until 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. But if you enjoyed this preview, let me know in the comments below. And also, as always, let me know in the comments your prediction for all of these 12 games that's going to happen tomorrow. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button. And yeah, I, of course, will see you guys next time.